This was a few years ago. I, 34-year-old female, was out with friends from work. We were saying goodbye to one who was moving away for a new job. It was initially just dinner, but ended up clubbing. To be honest, I'm normally not the most sensible person when out for the night, but as the clubbing wasn't planned, I had driven, so I wasn't drinking. I was a bit annoyed about being out clubbing as the only one not drinking, but in hindsight, this saved my ass. For clarification, I have always had an eccentric appearance and often color my hair. At the time, my hair was blonde with blue and pink tips, often worn in pigtails. I had a pair of knee-high boots that I loved that were one black and the other white. Yes, I bought 2 pairs of boots specifically to wear them this way. I loved when people in shops would call me Harley Quinn and often dressed towards that. This night I was in my boots and pigtails, fishnets and shorts, and even an HQ printed tee. I got into dancing and spent a fair bit of time looking after my smashed friends. The drag queens at my local gay bar loved my outfit, and despite being sober, I was getting hyped and enjoyed myself. I eventually made sure that my drunk friends got into ride safely and started walking back to my car, which unfortunately I hadn't put in a parking structure. I was cheap and left it on a side street. I'll never do that again. The streets were brightly lit and fairly populated, but I kept my keys in my fingers just out of general practice. I had received a wolf whistle or two and someone calling, "Hey, Harley." But I was kind of used to catching attention from the way I dressed, wanting to get to my car. "Harley," I heard again, but it was someone else's voice. I didn't look because I didn't want to engage or make an opening for conversation. "Don't ignore us, bitch," I heard. That's when I looked across the street and saw that it was the 3 men. I just shook my head to show I'm not interested and kept walking. There were other people in the lit street, so I figured they wouldn't do anything. I was wrong. They crossed the street. "I'm just heading home, guys. Sorry." I started speeding up and they followed. "We just want to talk for a second. You don't have to go home yet. And we can take you home, Harley, come on." My heart was racing at this point. I looked to the small handful of other people in the street. Some were stumbling, shit-faced. Most either ignored or didn't even notice the situation, as people shouting at that hour in that part of the city was common. I didn't care if it looked like I was overreacting. I clutched my keys and ran. I'd hoped they'd realize that they were coming across as creeps and just back off, or maybe they'd just call me a crazy jerk and let it go. They called me a bitch alright, but my blood ran cold as I heard them chasing me. I'm not a fast runner, and though my boots had wide heels, the heels were very tall and I kept picturing myself tripping, picturing myself dropping the keys, and picturing them catching up. I kept focused, not daring to look back, knowing how clumsy I am and that I couldn't risk it. I rounded the corner. The street was empty, but my car was under a streetlight. I was holding back tears as I reached the door. I took a deep breath to steady my fingers, adamant not to be that person so close to safety, just to screw it up by panicking and dropping my keys. I opened it, got inside, slammed the door, and locked it just in time. One of them tried to open my door. I was trembling and couldn't make out what they were saying as they shouted, kicking my car, cursing at me, calling me Harley. I peeled out of there, almost hitting one of them. After 5 minutes driving, enough to get a safe distance, I pulled aside, shaking and crying too hard to drive safely. I got a haircut the next day. My HQ phase was over. It took a while to be comfortable dressing in my own style again. This isn't the only time I've been harassed by men, but this was the only time it was a group, and I'd never been chased or had somebody show explicitly violent intent like they had that night. If I had anything to drink or let panic cause me to fumble, I don't want to think about what they might have done to me. But sometimes I just can't avoid thinking about it. This happened in August of 2013. I was visiting Montreal for their driver's site weekend, which was basically like Pride but took place the long weekend before the official Montreal Pride. My best friend at the time met a guy at Toronto Pride a month earlier, and he invited both of us to come there so my friend wouldn't be uncomfortable going to spend the weekend with someone he didn't know well. We arrived on Thursday, and the trip was going great. We went out the first night and walked the streets that were closed off to cars the next day, and our host made us a nice dinner, and then we went out again Friday night. Just a quick note before I get into what happened. I partied quite a bit with drugs at this time, and I also in the past had a tendency to lose my cell phone, so for about a year prior, I stopped taking my cell phone whenever I went out. So that Friday night, we went out to a club, parking, which sadly has since closed, and it was another fun night. The music was great and the tequila shots were incredibly cheap. I was dancing and moving all around the club, but would circle back and check in with my friend and our host. And I would also run into people that I knew who were also visiting from Toronto, and ended up taking some MDMA from one of them, and danced some more until I was basically soaked in sweat, so I went to the bathroom to wipe myself down and use it, because I had to pee. When I got into the bathroom, there was somebody leaving, but it looked like I was the only one in there. I went and used the stall because I have a hard time using the urinal, and when I came out, I was quite surprised to see a man in the corner of the washroom smiling at me. He looked to be in his mid-30s, on the shorter side and a bit chubby. He was wearing a polo shirt and jeans and had glasses, and I remember thinking when I saw him, he reminded me of an accountant for some reason. Not sure why that popped in my head. I was pretty sure I didn't hear the door, but I couldn't be so sure, so I just smiled back and said hello as I went to wash my hands. "Hello," he responded. "Are you having fun tonight?" I replied I was, and that the music was incredible, and was wiping myself down with paper towels and my shirt. "Do you want to do some coke with me?" he asked. Now, this was not the first time I had been offered coke in a bathroom at a nightclub, and had done this in the past and ended up having some good experiences, and even meeting some interesting people, so I was already high and drunk and not thinking much of it. I said, "Sure, I'd love to, thanks. I live just right near here. It's at my place if you don't mind coming over. We can do a few lines and have a drink, then walk back to the club," he replied. Now, obviously looking back, I realized how very dumb my following actions were, and I can't imagine myself being so stupid and careless now. But without thinking about it, I agreed, and I left with him. The club allowed you to re-enter if you had a wristband. We chatted on the walk over to his place. He asked me where I was from because I didn't seem like I was from Montreal and what parties I had gone to and how old I was and my name. I asked his name, but instead, he responded that we had arrived. The whole walk felt like 5 minutes, but I honestly hadn't been paying much attention to where we were walking. His apartment was in this building that had 3 floors, and his unit was on the 2nd floor, and you had to climb this long, narrow metal staircase, and his door seemed to be in the middle of 2 other apartments on either side. He unlocked the door and let me in first, flicked on the lights, and told me to make myself comfortable. I was walking and noticed he had carpet, so I turned around to ask him if I should take my shoes off, when I noticed that he was locking the front door from the inside with the key above the regular lock. And in that moment, I was overwhelmed with a feeling of dread like I never had felt before. The danger I'd possibly put myself in. Another city, no phone, nobody knows where I am, and now seeing this person locking their door from inside with a key. I just thought to myself, I'll pretend I didn't see that. Won't take my shoes off, and I'll politely hang out for a few minutes, then ask to head back. I also thought I could be having an extreme overreaction to what I saw because I was pretty high, but as I looked around, everything inside of me was just screaming, "You need to get out of here." I went and sat on the arm of the couch, and he said I should take off my shoes and relax. I was getting a better look at him now in the lights of his apartment. He still looked plain and unassuming, but his eyes looked shifty, and he pulled down both of the shades on the windows that were on each side of the door. I told him that I was okay and I was eager to get back to dancing, so he said he would make us drinks and then we could go back. The apartment looked much bigger inside than it did from the street. It was an open layout with a living room beside the kitchen, and then a hallway in the middle with closed doors painted black, and I could hear music coming from one of the doors. I asked him if somebody else was there as he came from the kitchen with a glass, and he replied no. As he handed me my glass, he looked me up and down. I wasn't wearing a shirt. He said with this increasingly creepy smile spreading across his face, "You have a very beautiful body, especially your chest. Would you mind if I took some photos of you before we went back?" Now, obviously, every alarm bell is going off in my head now, and all I can think about is Jeffrey Dahmer and his Polaroids. And what I'm going to do, because this was just such a creepy thing to say, and all I can manage is a polite laugh as I take the drink and say, "Sure." "Excellent," he says. He then tells me to take off my shoes and that he is going to get the coke and his camera and to finish my drink. He walks down the hall, takes out his keys, unlocks the 2nd door, and opens the door enough to slip in and closes it behind him. The second that door was closed, I jumped up, ran over to the sink and dumped my drink, put my shirt on. It had been tied around the belt loop of my shorts and ran to the front door. I was able to turn and unlock the regular lock, but the door would not budge. I kept turning and pulling, but nothing. Then I heard from behind me, "What are you doing?" I turned around and he was standing at the base of the hallway with one of those professional cameras slung around his neck and holding a square mirror with a pile of white powder on it. I thanked him for the drink, gesturing to my empty glass, but said that it was getting late and I wanted to get back, but we could exchange numbers and maybe meet up tomorrow. His demeanor slightly changed. Still smiling, but his tone when he next spoke sounded irritated. He asked me if I was nervous about taking the photos and if I should just wait for my drink to relax me, and I said no, that I just want to go. This exchange of him telling me to stay and me saying no went back and forth for about a minute when he suddenly glared at me, put down the mirror, pointed it at the couch and said, "Sit down now." Not knowing what to do or how I was going to get out of this, I remembered that there were other units on each side of us, and it had to be around 2:30 in the morning at this point, so I just started screaming at the top of my lungs like a madman, banging on the door, the window, and the wall. "Shh, shut up, be quiet." He snapped at me as he ran to the door. He quickly unlocked it and told me to get out and stepped aside. I bolted out that door and down the stairs, skipping the bottom steps, and hopped over the side of the railing. I looked up behind when I landed, and he wasn't there, but I heard a door slam and took off running down the street. I hadn't paid attention on the walk there, so I didn't know which way to walk, but I knew it was close. And luckily, I was able to wave down a passing taxi and take it back to the bar. When I got back to the bar, I found my friend in the same spot dancing. The whole incident must have been less than half an hour. I was too embarrassed about how stupid I had been and being back in the club. I started to feel bad that I had just freaked out on this nice man, so I didn't say anything, but I stayed by his side until we left shortly after I got back. The entire thing felt quite surreal, and I remember the next day when I did tell my friend, kind of laughing it off and joking about getting murdered and trying to make light of it because it was so scary. And it wasn't until years later, after joining Reddit and this sub and reading other stories, that I started to think about that night more and more and realized how much potential danger I put myself in. When I was a kid, I had a creepy encounter with a grown man. His half of this was much longer than mine. I think this is important to the story. I was a preteen when this happened, but I hit puberty early enough that I looked like a young teenager. We used to have a tiny barn on my property, and it was my job to milk our dairy goats every morning. So every single morning at almost the exact same time, I'd be in the back corner of our lot to milk. It was in a fairly isolated area of our yard and between the three neighbors. Fields, pastures, which was intentional since goats can be talkative, so it was right beside our neighbor's chain link fence and grapevines. I'd sing fairly loudly every morning since there was generally nobody to be bothered, and it calmed down the goats. So it was easy to know there was a girl back there every morning and night. This particular morning, my mom had a bad feeling and made my little brother go with me. He was bored, so he messed around and collected eggs while I milked. There were little windows all around, including a wide one right behind me, and the doors were wide open, so I figured he'd come back eventually. Well, I saw him walk past the doors and start talking to somebody. I figured it was the neighbor, so I didn't worry when he said, "Okay, I'll get my mom," and took off. Then I heard the chain link fence behind me rattle, and I turned around just in time to see a man launch himself over the chain link fence into the neighbor's yard. He'd been watching me and waiting since before I got into the yard. I don't know what he would have done to me if my mom hadn't made my brother go with me that morning. I did get out of goat milking solo, though. I grew up in a small town and I could walk and play a couple blocks from home, but only with the company of one of my older brothers and later our family dog, a super protective Rottweiler mix, when I was older. I was never allowed to leave the house by myself because my parents didn't want anything happening to me. There was a well-known neighborhood creep, an old man, probably 60 or so in age, that lived alone in a house on the street adjacent to ours. In the house next to his lived a couple that were good neighbors and great friends of my parents. Let's call them the Smiths. They were about the same age as my parents and loved children, but they couldn't have any of their own. My parents had 7 biological kids and 4 non-biological kids. I was the youngest. There are a few incidents where I remember running into the neighborhood creep. One being when I was at the corner gas station with one of my brothers and he came up behind me, smelled my hair, and told my brother I was cute. Another time when I was riding with my dad in his truck, the guy flagged down my dad and asked him if I was my dad's wife. I was 10 at the time. So yeah, he was a major creep, but there is one incident that will always stick with me. I and my siblings would occasionally go over to the Smith's house because they were really nice, loved us, and would let us swim in their pool, because we didn't have one. They would also pay us for doing small odd jobs. They sometimes would watch me for my parents, as most of my siblings were teenagers with a lot of extracurricular activities. One day, my brother and I went over to the Smith's house. My brother was in charge of watching me that day, and Mr. Smith offered my brother some money to help him move some stuff out to the front of their house for a yard sale and to help them sell things. While the yard sale was going on, I was sitting on their front porch playing with my Barbie doll. A few people had come and gone, but my brother and Mr. Smith went inside to go through some more stuff to sell. Miss Smith was busy trying to help somebody who was buying something. Then along came the neighborhood creep. He looked around a bit, trying to seem interested in buying stuff. Then he came up to me, bent down, touched my hair, and said, "How much for you?" I was incredibly shy as a child. I would cry if strangers even waved at me. This man literally made me pee myself, and I immediately started crying and screamed repeatedly for my brother. Mr. Smith and my brother came running outside, and all I remember was my brother picking me up and carrying me home, while Mr. Smith tried to figure out what happened. Hello. This sad, terrible story took place in the year of 2003 when I was a 14 or 15-year-old girl still living in my home country of Uruguay. My best friend at the time, same age as me, was my neighbor who lived with her mother and grandmother, 3 houses down from mine. We had been friends since we were babies, and we grew up together, went to the same school, moved in the same social circle, went on vacation together, shared clothes, CDs, food. We were basically sisters, and our families were very close. Her mom, in her early 30s at the time, was a single mom working as a secretary. They didn't have it bad. Between her salary and the grandmother's pension, they lived comfortably and without any major setbacks. Her mom started seeing a foreign guy who was in the country for business. He claimed to be from Spain, but he had a funny accent, as if he were originally from Italy or another non-Spanish speaking country. He was supposedly rich, despite staying in a rinky-dink hotel. The hotel did have a pool though, lol. He would often show pictures of himself in very luxurious residence. He said it was his house in Ibiza, pictures of him driving a red sports car, and a picture of him in front of the Eiffel Tower. Thinking back, I can't believe how innocent we were. And so on. After a month and a half or so of dating, my friend's mom said they were leaving the country in perhaps the next 7 months. She was in love with him, and he had promised her a life of luxury in Europe, and everything was going to be perfect. The country they were moving to was Spain, she and her daughter. The grandma couldn't come though, at least not yet. She was supposed to meet them in the future after they had settled in, but at the same time, wasn't he rich? Way too many red flags here. This is where I come in. Since I was such good friends with Maritza, the guy had told Maritza's mom to bring me along for a vacation, saying that it would be good for Maritza to make the transition easier. I was of course thrilled about a month in Europe with my best friend, who was moving away, and the idea of going to see her every summer and stay at her stepfather's mansion was a dream. My parents, of course, weren't so thrilled at first, but as they got to know him, they liked him, and eventually he won them over too. Eventually, I even got a little weekend job as a waitress at my uncle's restaurant to help my parents with the plane ticket and other costs. We got my passport. We were ready to go. As the months went by, it became evident that I wasn't going to be able to go. The money I had saved wasn't enough, and it didn't even cover half of the ticket, and my parents couldn't come up with the money for the rest of the trip. A week or so before they left, the guy came to my house and talked to my parents. He offered to pay for my plane ticket. My parents politely declined. I was fuming. I swore I would never talk to my parents again. I didn't come out of my room for days. Eventually, I got over it, and when it was time to go to the airport to say goodbye to them, I did. We cried, hugged, and promised each other that we would meet up next summer. By then, I would already have the money saved. They left. We never heard from them again. The days went by, nothing. I remember the grandmother, the pain on her face. The night she went on without sleeping, home alone without her daughter and granddaughter who were supposed to call her as soon as they arrived in Spain, and yet they never did. Eventually, they were reported as missing. Surprisingly enough, the guy had given out his real first and last name the whole time. So after the cops got involved, it turned out that he had this huge record in Spain and Italy, and had been to jail for drugs, prostitution, kidnapping, extortion, and who knows what else. The police told their family that they were most likely sold into a human trafficking ring, as this was very common, and that sadly there were too many cases like it. There was nothing to do but wait. Last time anyone saw them or had any register of them was at the airport in Seville when they arrived. Nothing else. It breaks my heart to this day, and to think that if my parents had said yes, I wouldn't be here today sends chills down my spine. Sometimes I look Maritza up on Facebook in hopes that I'll find her. Maybe she regained her life and her freedom, but nothing ever shows up. The grandmother died in 2013 too. Sadly, without ever seeing or hearing about her daughter and granddaughter again.